also there is someone who says they don't know me. Am I saying your name right, Magdalena? Okay, well, I'm Courtney Osborne. I am a freelance fashion designer. I focus on accessories, and I do these lunch and learns because I like to share knowledge and information, and also it's just fun to like meet other people and hear other people's experiences, and it's just a way to really have like that kind of open gatekeeping vibe that I like to facilitate in this industry. And I know a lot of people that are here also feel the same. So that's why I do this. All right, one more minute and then we'll get started. If you just recently joined, people are putting in the chat who they are and what they do just to kind of share and network, and maybe you'll meet a new friend today. Jay, can we see your mug? That was your mug? That's so cool. All right, let's kick it off. This is a little bit longer than normal. I made it an hour and a half because I do want to have the ability to really have an open discussion. So we may not stay the whole time. If, conversation drops off, we can end early. But if we're going, we'll keep it going. I want to thank the people who offered to speak today. We have a couple of great 3D designers who have given topics they want to talk about. So I have Diane, Avanti. Trudy actually said that she was going to come and chat, but she had a client or something call overlap. So she's going to try and make it later. If she does join us, I'll let her jump in and share. And then I have Davina. Hi, Davina. I don't think I've met you yet. So nice to meet you. And actually, Diane, I don't think I've met you officially yet either. So thank you both for coming and for being willing to chat. I want to start. We're going to start with the people who have offered to speak and let them kind of share what the topics that they wanted to talk about. And then we'll jump into questions. I have a list of questions that came in early on the forums. And then after that, we can just do open conversation and, people can shout out questions or whatever it might be. Also, I do want to maybe tap Kate because I know Kate Knight has been working very hard to learn 3D over the summer and has made huge strides. So we can encourage Kate to kind of share her experience too. All right, so Diane just completed a 3D course and wants to share her experience and her learning of the 3D program. So Diane, let's hear from you.
Yeah, I just mostly wanted to share because I felt like if I'm beginning at this too, then maybe there are other people joining today that might also have similar experiences. And I'll be very curious to hear from Kate because one of my biggest things in learning this program is that just over my years of pattern making, I started as a hand pattern maker with drafting on paper patterns, and then that skill set started to not disappear, but it'd be less desirable for fast fashion, and then moved to Gerber after that because that was a necessity to stay working, and done Gerber for many, many years now. And now I'm seeing that same thing happening with some of these 2D programs where 3D is really kind of taking over, and where when I was moving from flat hand pattern making into Gerber, I was very resistant and very much like, I'm not doing this. I'm not going to do this. Hand patterning is the way to do it. It's accurate, whatever I came up with. And since then I've learned, bringing new things in is the healthy thing to do. So as soon as I started hearing about Clo 3D is the program I just learned. And as soon as I started learning about it, I really wanted to dive in because I wanted to just embrace and be able to accept, this is the new way of pattern making, and just be able to somehow find a way to mesh all of these ways into one big, beautiful skill, I guess is so anyway, so here we are. So I've just gotten out of last month. I took introduction to Clo 3D with the Clo team, and it was overwhelming, much as almost identically to how I felt when I was learning Gerber. It was very overwhelming, the amount of information and the amount of little buttons you have to learn, and the sheer beauty of this program is mind-blowing. And so I learned the intro, and then found out that they had other classes specific to tech design, pattern making. And so I just literally yesterday finished the tech design class. And again, that one was even more overwhelming than the intro class. But I genuinely am blown away and intrigued by these programs. The stuff that the stuff that even just like manipulating a dart yesterday, like my mind exploded and I was like, oh my God, that's so easy. And look at it go, look at it do it. So the experience has been stressful, but also really joyful as well at the same time, because I really want to learn this program and I really want to be good at it. And I do feel like, my experience with pattern making is helping a little bit in that I don't have to learn that aspect of it. I just have to learn the program. And so for me, I'm really excited about today's call, because I really want to learn from you guys, and I really want to hear, like, how long did it take you to get really good at this program? How long, and this will be different for every person probably, but like, how long did it take you? Do you feel like it was a really valuable ad? Which, I can assume, since we're all here, that answer would be yes. Just so that I can, learn from you guys as a group, and learn and have an understanding of like what to expect and how to proceed forward with this new information that I have. So the experience has been beautiful, and I'm really blown away by the program, and I'm really blown away by how quickly it's adapting. They yesterday in the class, she really wanted to point out that like these programs are updated constantly, which I guess is the beauty of computer programming. So it's pretty amazing, the amount of just feedback Patternmaker were giving her, with like the buttons and the programming and and she took down notes on every single aspect that we gave her of like, why can't we do it like this, or how can we do this? And so I guess that's kind of it. I just wanted to kind of just share that I'm new and this is scary, but I'm open to learning. And I'm excited to learn from you guys. So thank you for letting me speak.
Yeah, thank you, Diane. I wanted to ask you a question. How did you find the courses that you took?
So I found it on Eventbrite, actually. Part of it was, so the last production, vice president of production that I worked with, I was working for a company called Birdie Gray that does bridesmaids and little white dresses. And they were sort of just starting to delve into Clo. And so when I was working with her, she said, you really need to learn this program. Like, I'm just seeing like what it can do, and you need to get in and figure it out. So I immediately signed on. I went onto their website and signed on and started paying for the program. And then it was just so overwhelming. I kind of just didn't use it for a long time. And then I was on Eventbrite for a completely separate thing, and I just saw Clo was there, and so I just signed up to be reminded when they pop things up, and I saw it, so immediately signed up.
That's awesome. That's when the algorithm actually works.
Yes, exactly. And I have to say, like, it was it's hard to get into the classes with them because they have such small numbers for the classes, but I also felt like the price of the classes was reasonable considering what you're learning. And yes, the algorithm worked perfectly on me because I was, just doing all the researching and like, how much can I learn about this? I was on YouTube for a while trying to figure it out there.
Awesome. Well, thank you for sharing. Are you able to stick around for like the whole, okay.
Yeah.
When we round back to questions later, if anyone has a question for Diane, note it down. And when we go to the question section, feel free to shout out to Diane and ask her questions. All right. Kate, can we get you to speak?
Sure. I bought the video course for Clo, their official one, at Christmas, and was really struggling to like watch a video and learn that way. And then connected with Avanti, who has very kindly over the last few months been basically tutoring me, which has gone much better because I am much more open to learning from a friend than a video. And I have just in the last few weeks started to put renders in my tech packs. I'm still not good at doing the what do we call it, Avanti? the different layers to make it look more like a fabric. So one of the things one of the things that I'm still I sort of stood on the edge of 3D for 2 or 3 years, looking at it, thinking, I don't know what to do, because really I should also be using Apex, which is better for yarns because I do knitwear. But I can already see the massive advantage in that I can show a client, like, this is what a 68 centimeter body looks like, or I've done it, and I've done, so we're having a much more in-depth conversation earlier in the whole process rather than making samples, something's wrong, blah, blah, blah. So it's already proving valuable. And yeah, I'm excited to feel like it's taken me 8 months, but starting to feel like I've got some traction. So big thank you to Avanti and Courtney as well, who has also been part of that journey. I've also been amazed. I posted on LinkedIn a few months ago being like, okay, I'm really struggling, like, how are people learning? And that one post, I got massive, overwhelming amount of people offering to help, offering, like, reach out to me if something's bothering you, and like the warmth around 3D fashion is lovely.
I would completely agree. I would say that's the experience that I've seen as well, that this is another area where like the open gatekeeping is kind of like a very prominent aspect for me, where I see people so willing to help each other, so willing to talk about it. Avanti and I actually started talking about doing like an ongoing 3D accountability group where like we would have like coaches come occasionally to help answer questions and like all that kind of stuff, and just having like kind of an ongoing conversation. Unfortunately, I've just been incredibly busy this summer and that never materialized. But if that ever does come out, I will let you all know if anyone's interested. I will say, from my own experience as well as like from what hearing Kate has said, like having a partner, a buddy, someone else to talk to while you're going through this makes all the difference. Like it's just like freelancing or doing anything. Like when you're doing it on your own, it feels like a slog through mud. And then as soon as you have someone to talk to, it starts to like, the clouds start to clear.
Yeah. And that's my hack for everything really.
It's true.
Find somebody else to do it with.
Alrighty, thank you, Kate. All right, Avanti, perfect segue.
Yeah, I work as a 3D designer. I don't know, should I do like a background?
Yeah, I think you need to, because okay, before we let Avanti go off, I'm gonna go off for her because Avanti is like amazing. She knows so much about a million different 3D programs. She has like self-taught. She is amazing coach. She's so patient. And like, if you need help in 3D, she's your girl.
Oh, thanks, Courtney.
I just to drop in there, I don't think I've yet asked you a question that you don't know the answer to.
That day may still come.
Yeah, it's been a good track record.
Yeah, if anybody knows anybody in like 3D programs, like they should hire her as like a teacher, as like someone to do YouTube videos, as like a for hire coach. Like she's that.
Yeah, and also I'll stop for a minute, but also I know how annoying it is to watch someone else's screen and you're like, yeah, the button you need is on the left top hand corner, and you're like, no, the other left top hand corner, Kate. When you're watching someone else do it and you want to just grab the mouse and be like, it's there, but you've been so patient, being like, no, the top left hand corner, no, over there, no, down, that's which is really annoying.
It's not annoying, don't worry.
Okay. So, Avanti, let's hear your quick background. Let's hear why you're so passionate for 3D. And then the two topics that you said that you would love to share are 3D for pattern making and physical product development, and how 3D can really, truly improve your tech packs.
So I think that might be a bit long. So I think I'm going to just focus on the tech pack one. Because
we're giving you 15 minutes. Go.
Okay. So just to give you a bit of my background. So I've been working in fashion for the last very, very long time, mostly in commercial fashion. And I was first introduced to Clo and Browswear about 9 years ago, but I didn't really start using it until before the pandemic. And during the pandemic, so I had sort of started learning on my own, sort of Browswear and Clo, because I had a friend who actually works for Browswear. So he kind of got me into that as well. and I come from a pattern making and design background, so that's why browswear at first used to be the better option for that, but that's definitely not the case anymore. And I have a background in Lectra as well, not Gerber, but Lectra. So I think they're the same company now, but like, so that's sort of like where I came from. Before that, it was paper patterns for sure. How I learned. But I used to work for a pretty big European retailer, and there they started a project to implement Clo into the business. And unfortunately, at the time, even though I was part of the implementation, I was a manager in the team. So I knew that at some point, even if it was fully integrated, I would never get to use it, because my job was to manage the team, not to do any of the actual work, which is very sad. So if anyone's been in corporate management, you know. So I decided to leave that job completely and focus only on freelancing, only on pattern cutting, pattern making, and technical, but with 3D. So all the projects I work with, whether clients want it or not, they get 3D from me. So I actually really want to talk about something. I want to talk about tech packs and the technical side to Clo, because I think this is something that's still, sorry, when I say Clo, I don't mean just Clo, any 3D program, because I think they're pretty even, and I work in browswear, Clo, Style 3D, and there's some other ones that I've worked with as well, but primarily I work with browswear and Clo. The thing is, like, when you work in 3D, it's a fairly emerging part of our industry in fashion. So the jobs that come with it are still very varied at the moment. And I think that I can always put them into sort of two boxes. One is the visualization side, very much used in e-commerce. If you've ever worked for a wholesaler, internal lookbooks, wholesale lookbooks, things like that. So truly to visualize the product. And then the other side, you have the true product development side, which has nothing to do with rendering, in fact. And as coming from a technical background, my background's actually specifically in tailoring, so that's super technical. I have always tended towards the technical side, but at first I was very much in the whole, like, caught up in the whole 3D, the beauty of it, and focused a lot with rendering as well, and like working in other programs. So I work in Blender, Unreal Engine, all these other programs to sort of visualize product. But I really want to talk about the product design development side of it, because I don't think it gets enough attention. So what I found is that working in 3D helps you really create very accurate tech packs. And although I come from a pattern making background, so when I create anything in Clo, I work with blocks, I work with patterns that I know work in real life, that have been, you know, blocks that I've worked with for years that have been assessed. So I do have that background. But even if you don't come from a pattern making background and you're just using an existing block, someone else's block, using something default, you're still creating an object in 3D that is akin to a lifelike object. Now, you might not be able to share the patterns afterwards, but what you can do with this is get like a very, very good idea of proportion, a very good idea of how you would want it to fit. What are the measurements? What are the measurements of all the individual elements? What is the size of the print that should go on it if you have a print or an artwork? So all of this really vital information that we put into a tech pack, and let's be honest, before 3D, most people have to estimate all of these important details that you use to develop a product, like things like specs, you know, like the measurements that we put into specs. A lot of them, they come from standard templates, or you kind of estimate them. Design measurements, often very much estimated, or based on a sample that you might have on hand, but is not necessarily the pattern you're going to use in the final product. So much of that estimation and guesswork gets taken out when you're creating a tech pack if you start with 3D. And that's something that I think is extremely powerful. It's very, very valuable for product development. And it's very unsexy. So people don't often talk about it, because you don't get a beautiful visual from something that you're never going to render. But I think it's absolutely vital. And I think it's really an area that more people need to focus on. And as with Kate works in Knitwear, and we've been working together to figure out the best workflow to create garments for flat knit, or so not cut and sew. Here in Europe we call it flat knit. I think everywhere they call it just knitwear. But like for her, it's so much about it is getting the proportions right, and the next part is just seeing how the gauge works on the garment. But it's not so much about fit, but all of that is the vital information that she would put in a tech pack, because knitting machines will knit the garment for her, so she doesn't have to worry about fit necessarily. So hopefully I'm not confusing people by saying this, but like the value of the object in 3D is incredible. And I think that's what people need to realize. And when you learn Clo, I think, or any sort of like 3D apparel program specifically, you have to remember that those programs can do so much, and you really need to focus on the areas that are going to bring you the most value in the work that you do every day. And I don't think necessarily that should be focusing on rendering, it should be focusing on, it could be just focusing on patterns. Maybe you don't do tech packs, maybe you only do pattern making. So that should be your focus. Or maybe do tech packs and you just need to vet a style. You get a factory pattern and you put it together and you sort of like edit that yourself somehow to get the right measurements for your tech pack. So there has to be a very proactive way of working in it. And I do struggle a little bit with the courses out there because I've had to come to this, a workflow that works for this myself, which I think that there's not enough teaching on out there right now. There's only teaching on the sexy part of 3D, which is not bad, but yeah, there we go. So I'll stop waffling.
You only talked for 6 minutes.
Oh, okay. Anyone have any questions?
Yeah, let's open the floor a little bit for Avanti. If anyone wants to ask a couple questions, we'll do that.
Avanti, you said something very interesting. Sorry, Sarah raised her hand.
It's okay. Davina, go ahead, and then we'll go to Sarah next.
Because Avanti, you said like it's something similar that I've been finding, like that workflow aspect of how it really fits into how things are done, not necessarily as like show off the tool, right? But I wonder something that I've been wondering recently, and I would love to get your insight in this. I think part of the reason why we don't find courses that are more focused on the patterning or the product development aspect of it, how really it makes a difference on a large scale, is I don't think you can get there without having that knowledge. Like you talked about how you come from a pattern making background and a tailoring background. So you're able to put that knowledge and use 3D as a tool to help push you further. But if people are approaching 3D as the solution, it's just a tool. And I really have been wondering, because it's something that I've struggled with finding answers to, but I have come to the conclusion it's because teaching somebody pattern making in a 1 month course is not like, you have to bring those skills and that experience and apply it through 3D. Someone can teach you how to do Illustrator, that doesn't make you a graphic artist. But I don't know, I would love to get your thoughts on that.
So that's a really, really good point. So having worked on a team on a commercial corporate level where they were trying to integrate Clo into a design team. So I work with smaller businesses, but in the past I've worked with very large scale businesses and even as a freelancer. And the problem is that because over the last 20 years, we've offshored so much of our product development, that means that the technical skills don't remain in teams. And for this reason, one of the biggest issues when we were integrating Clo at the business that I worked in the first time, when I was still an employee, the issue was that nor the designers, nor the technical designers, nor the product developers, nobody was Patternmaker, because all the patterns were offshored. So I completely hear you there. Like, understanding pattern manipulation is a complicated part of is something that's very difficult to teach. It's something that you have to give a lot of devotion to, but I don't necessarily think that you need to have very firm, like very big background in pattern making to work in 3D programs. Now, I'm going to preface this to say I work in Browseware and Clo. Browseware is very, it's like a CAD program. So there's elements of it which are very much like Lectra or Gerber. So I think it's much more difficult to work freehand in those programs, whereas Clo, and I always say for all beginners, it's an amazing program, especially if you don't have a pattern making background, because the interface is so much like Illustrator, and all of these additional features that they're adding in means that you can easily change this pattern with some support in a way that you would just change a sketch in Illustrator. Of course, you should not be sharing those patterns ever or sending them to a sample room, but you can get the right visual of the product that you want. There's also a lot of assets out there that you can use, you can download within Closet to then sort of get your way around it. So I do think that there's a certain amount of basic drafting and very simple pattern making sort of like skills. I don't even want to call them skills, but they're sort of like pointers that you can give people who are starting in the program to be able to achieve the results of what they want, like whether that's a sketch or a picture or whatever. And I think Clo is a very good program for that because it allows you to achieve that whether or not, regardless of fit. So I think that's important, and that's enough to help you form an informed decision of what you're going to put in your tech pack, which is ultimately the only document that really matters at the end of the day. Even if I'm a pattern maker, that doesn't necessarily mean my clients' factories need my patterns. Sometimes they just want to use their own patterns, right? So the tech pack is the most important. So I do think that there are ways around that, and I don't know. I mean, Kate is not a pattern maker. She doesn't come from a pattern making background, but we've hopefully been approaching it in a way that she's understood like the basic skills that she needs to get a visual in front of her in Clo. And I think that's the approach that needs to be taken. And there's, Clo has its own library, like there's ways around this. But it's very important to make that distinction, and people need to understand that because, and this is a trap I often see, is that just because you're doing a pattern in Clo and it looks like a pattern, it doesn't mean it's going to work as a pattern. So you should never rely solely on that, but you can get a good foundation for what you're trying to create. I do worry on the long term that people who learn pattern making for the first time in a 3D program are a huge disadvantage to people who, especially if they want to grow as pattern makers, so I think that's something that does need to be taken into mind. I think if you want to be a pattern maker, you have to sit and sew at a machine. You've got to cut out that pattern and sew it at a machine, not just in 3D. So yeah, I hope that answered your question in a roundabout way.
Definitely round back to this too. Like this topic as a whole, we will round back on this after everyone speaks that mentioned a topic they want to talk about, because this also feeds into why I wasn't able to get this done with manufacturers on the call. So we'll come back to that. Sarah, do you want to ask your question? Oh, still on mute.
Yeah. Hi, Avanti.
Hi, Sarah.
This will be a quick one. I just was thinking, when you're using the details from Clo to make your tech packs, are you using Closet, or are you doing it in Excel or something else entirely?
So I don't use, I hope no one from Clo is going to watch or listen to this, but I really think that the internal tech pack system is kind of crap. The only time
No, that's a relief because I've been struggling with it. I'm still in Excel.
It doesn't work. It's not, I mean, you know what a tech pack should look like, what they generate. Also in Browserware, for that record, it's something that's made based on using all the information in 3D. And also another thing to remember is the pattern that you're making in 3D is not the pattern that you're going to cut on the machine, right? So there are things, especially that you have to kind of adjust if you're exporting that pattern. And even if you're making a tech pack from it, there's certain measurements, because you're working on something on a form, that you just can't take from a 3D object. So I use it to like sort of inform my decisions, and I do take measurements from it. I don't use Closet, because the only time I've ever used Closet is if I was working with a company that had invested in Closet and wanted to assess their 3Ds within Closet. That's the only, I don't particularly find it useful, but to sort of understand, to get basic measurements, to get initial specs, which you then do have to edit, because you're measuring a garment pattern essentially in Clo, or whatever version sort of type of pattern that you're measuring, but you're not actually measuring a finished garment, and that's going to always have some difference between it, right? And it's going to be measured flat, whereas the 3D object is measured on the pattern or on the object. So there's discrepancies between that, and I think people need to be educated on how much they can take from it, how much they still need to adapt. But it's still far more informed than guessing everything or taking something for something from a random sample. Yeah. Does that answer your question, Sarah? Yeah.
Megan, did you want to answer or ask your question quick?
Yes, sure. I just want to say that so far this has been extremely enlightening. Just these past 20 minutes, because so a little bit about my 3D background. I'm like a designer and product development person. I'm not a tech designer. I'm not a pattern maker. But I did learn Browseware when they still had their indie program, because I as well had a friend who used to work there. So Browseware, as you know, is like more technical. Like you really have to really, as you mentioned, really know pattern making. So I really struggled with figuring out how, just because like that's the only program I've used, I've struggled with figuring out how like someone like me fits into 3D. You know, since I'm not offering pattern making services. I don't want to, because it's not my expertise. I'm not trying to like sell myself as a pattern maker. And it is very time consuming to build things in Browseware. And I really struggled with how to integrate that into what I do, which is more design and development. And I guess in a way, like I didn't renew my Browseware subscription after the indie program ran out, because I was thinking maybe I'd move into Clo. And you're saying that I just want to ask more about how you mentioned that designers, you might use Clo to visualize, but you're not sending the pattern, which I'd never really heard of. I didn't really realize that, other than people who use it more for e-com. I get that they're not pattern makers, but do design development people as well use it just to visualize in their tech packs?
Yeah, so I can't speak for everyone, but I know that, like, for example, all of the workflows that they teach you on the Clo course, like everything is very much rooted in visualization. So I don't see why you can't use Clo for visualization. Also, the interface of Clo is very similar to Illustrator. So just the ease of use, the ease of tweaking things, it's very much easier to teach someone who's a designer, because a designer will have a foundation in Illustrator, and those skills are so much, it's very transferable. It's quite common. I can't speak for everyone, but like a lot of the times, like just to when I talk about visualization, I don't mean rendering. It's very important to note that, because to use things for e-commerce, that sort of rendering and then texturing and everything that comes with that is very, I find, very separate to what I do in Clo, and what I also encourage others to do in Clo. You, as an individual, like if you're not a pattern maker, you can always start with an existing garment. Like there's plenty of asset libraries out there. There's the Connect store as well, which is amazing. You can always find something to start with, which you can then edit slightly, or edit in any way you need to get a visual that is good enough for a tech pack. Because at the end of the day, and I usually do just like a basic render, or I love doing schematic renders as well. And that's good enough to put into your tech pack. I have to preface this by saying that I still use sketches in my tech pack alongside my 3D renders. And I don't care what anyone says to me. I don't think there's any other way around it. You have to do a sketch as well. But you get such a better idea of proportion just even using something that's available. And I think I encourage designers to work with pre-made assets, edit them, learn to edit them. Don't learn to pattern make from scratch, but learn to edit them. You get pockets, you get everything that you can just kind of attach and mix and Frankenstein something together. That really works well. But of course, don't share that pattern, because everything on the Connect website is made for the Clo default avatar, which is like 2 meters tall and not in the proportions of a standard size person, right?
Yeah.
So I think from that perspective, like you can use it to design. However, it does take longer, that is for sure. And someone who comes from a pattern making background is always going to be faster, but you learn on the job. You sort of like learn while you do, and you get faster and faster that way. And you start building up your own libraries of pockets, of details, things that you can start building together. And that's another thing that I always encourage anyone working in 3D is like build your own library, because don't start from zero, because you're going to take 3 times as longer. So
do you ever work with any like clients where like you are taking the like factory pattern and like checking it in 3D?
So one of the big parts of my job, actually one of the things that I did quite often is rather than drafting the pattern, I assess the grading. So I would often get like a base pattern without shrink. It's very important, without shrinkage, without seam allowance, always like a very brute pattern. And then with the rule table for the initial grading, so that we can look at the grading in 3D without ever having to make a sample, because pretty much no one makes regardless of the size of the business, pretty much no one makes graded samples. It's just not a thing. And I think with economic crunches, no one's making extra samples. Yeah. So like that is like a type of work that I do really quite often within 3D, and that doesn't need rendering, that doesn't need anything, that doesn't even need textures, that just needs visuals. However, one thing that I always encourage everyone to do is work with whether you're a pattern maker or not, you should always work with a body form that's correct. And one trap that I often see a lot of people falling into, first time users, like, are those that use like the default avatars in Browser Club, because the browser ones are a bit better, but they're not really standard like ASTM or EU sizes, right? So I love working with Alvanon. I know people are up and down about Alvanon, but I personally really like it. So that's something that I always encourage, to really get the proportions right. And if you're fitting, then obviously something like Alvanon you can fit in real life as well. So that's also very important. Does that answer? I don't know. I don't know if I'm answering anyone's questions or just like rambling. So
I think you are. Thank you. Jay, we'll take your question because I know you had your hand raised before, and then we'll move on to Davina. Diane, I saw your comment in the chat that she should be my first professional. She is. As I built the plan, she was the first person I talked to, and I was like, I'm not doing this unless you're on board. Okay, so Jay says, are you concerned that our industry is moving away from interaction with fiber and needle?
So by that, Jay, do you mean, are they moving away from sampling, physical sampling? Is that kind of your question, or like? Yeah, right? Is it more that? Okay, so absolutely not. Like, the one thing that I always tell everyone is that
that's part of it.
Yeah. So you cannot, like, anyone that tells you that you can, okay, and you can take my word from it just based on my experience, but I know there's people who will argue against this point, but you cannot replace sampling with only 3D samples. Like, that's just unrealistic in every scope of it. Like, when you're working for a business, as a standard, you have 3 to 4 standard samples. You have Jade did an amazing post about this, so I really recommend going and looking at that post. But like, those samples have to be made. You might skip one of them maybe, but they have to be made, because at the end of the day, you're producing something that's going to be made by human hands on a machine with loads of different tolerances and worn on a body, right? So there's, like, I think at the very beginning, 3D was very much sold, and the owners of the companies like Chloe, and they were all very complicit in saying, oh, you're going to reduce sampling. But what they didn't tell you is that anyone who's worked in any business will tell you that, yes, four samples are essential. So you've got your proto, you've got your I used to call it red tag, but you've got your counter sample, you've got your pre-production, you've got production sample. Something like that. You write 4 samples that you have to have made. But in reality, especially if you're working with complicated styles, difficult fit, you tend to have a lot of extra samples in between your proto and your first counter sample, or after your first counter sample before you get to an approved prototype of any kind, right? That is the sampling that you're more likely to cut out, okay? So this is something that I still think big and small businesses don't understand, and that's why they don't see ROI immediately on 3D, and they tend to abandon these projects, which is very unfortunate. So I think if you're getting into 3D, it's very important to remember that, and it's important to sort of like communicate the right message about it, because otherwise it sets very unrealistic expectations about what it can do. It's a tool to help you get to the initial end product, but it's not something that's ever going to replace anything in our end-to-end process. Like, it's just not possible. Unless they start having robots that can sew with perfect tension every single day. Like, I don't even want to say stuff like that out loud, but you know what I mean? Like, it's just never going to happen.
I saw this video yesterday that was like a machine in a convenience store that was like making a hot dog. So like, imagine if you're like going to the gas station. I don't know what it's like in other countries, but in America, if you go to the gas station, they typically have like hot dogs and hamburgers and things. And so this machine was supposed to like cook the bun and the hot dog and like put them together and like put a sauce on and then put it in a bag and then like drop it, and then it was supposed to be served to you, and it completely failed. Like, it ended up like handing a hot dog to this person that was like not in a wrapper. The bun didn't make it. Like, there was no sauce. It was like, the person was like, I can't even eat this because it just touched everything. And that's like, as soon as you said that, that was my first thought. It's like, it's never going to be like that. Like, maybe a million years in the future, a machine is going to perfectly make a garment, but it's not anytime soon.
And I think a very good example of this is, in fact, knitwear, because knitwear machines are I mean, knitwear designers in here, you can shout if I'm wrong, but there's a lot of automation in knitwear, and the stitching is done by machine. Linking is done by hand, but you still have to measure the cross front, and there is variation because textiles in themselves are very organic materials. If it's hot that day in the factory, things are going to shrink. If it's cold that day in the factory, maybe they won't. You know, like there's a lot of things, like maybe it was woven too tight, the fabric, or maybe the yarn was not as, I don't know, I'm making things up, but like, because the very fiber that we work with are so like organic, and like there's so many like variances to them. Like, I don't really think that we're ever going to be in a place where you're getting away with never making a sample. Like, it's just not going to happen. So sampling, understanding construction techniques, I don't know if that goes into what you were asking, Jay, but like by fiber and needle, but understanding all these fundamental techniques, none of this, you can't really tell what tension your machine should have, what thickness your needle should have in clo, because it's always going to give you a perfect stitch. You don't know where your seam allowances are piling up on top of each other because you've designed something really complicated and there's shit tons of, sorry, excuse me, my language, but there's loads of bulk in your seam, right? Or on a corner. Like, this kind of stuff you will only figure out in sampling. So no, you can never replace samples. And I will, that's a hill I will die on, like, literally. Sorry.
No. Thank you so much, Avanti. And I'm sure you're going to pop back up when we kind of have more open discussion. And this, in general, this is a beautiful discussion, and I want to keep it going. But I also want to give Davina a chance to share with us, because she offered when I put the questionnaire out. So let's have Davina share about how she showcases her 3D work. And then I think we'll probably, I'll start doing questions that came in early. And then if there's still time, we'll come back and just really open up the conversation on the floor for everyone to kind of talk on this, because I feel like this is like really the meat of like what everyone really wants to hear about.
I mean, honestly, Avanti, I know you and I have never met, but you've been so good at like every question, every point that I had you've touched upon it, because I think it really goes to show for those of us who are figuring out how this belongs to our workflows or to the industry at large. We're all going through some of this, asking the same questions. So if I start repeating whatever Avanti said, guys, please just let me know, because you've really made such excellent points. I had put my topic as showcasing 3D work because I think, let me take a step back. I'll just introduce myself. Hi guys, I'm Davina. I worked in corporate for 15 years, working for larger companies. I have, in the past couple of years, I moved into education. So I'm actually teaching fashion now. And as of last week, I first came across 3D. I started using 3D during the pandemic, like training myself to do 3D. And as of last week, I was accredited as an instructor from CLO. Basically means I can teach other students for them to get certified in CLO, like a proficient enough to give that training. And some of the things that I was finding out, like similar, like when you're showcasing your 3D work, I think to peel the layers of the onion and really coming back to what problem are you trying to solve, right? Because we can't blame our clients because they don't have the knowledge that we do. Because even for us, when we look at a tool like Flow or Browseware or any tool out there, right? The way it's portrayed is, oh, this is just gonna, like, I have this idea and I can do everything and it's the magic wand, and then where is that button that I click that everything works out? And this is something an actual student asked me the first time they were taking Flow. So at the end of it, I can just like click a button and then everything can come together, including tech packs. And one of the biggest things in Flow, I mean, any 3D, is like recognizing that problem, because like what Avanti was saying, there is the modeling, right? There is the building the pattern, how you can visualize different designs. And if that's the problem that you're trying to solve, I have all these sketches that I've made and I want to see which ones would be most viable. Like, it looks really good when I sketch it. I just don't know how it's going to translate into real life, which is where we go through those 2, 3, 4 samples on the front end before we've even decided to make a pattern. I think Clo can be really helpful for that visualizing aspect. And if that is the problem that you are trying to solve, right, then just focusing, then using those basic blocks because you're trying to visualize how the color blocking would look or how the seam proportions would look. Using that, like focusing on just those style lines or those dot manipulations and using your basic assets or like from the Clo library, for example, using that and just building the design. So as a designer, that can be really helpful. And if you're trying to have a conversation with the client, like just being very clear, in my opinion as well, that this is what we can work together. So you've got these ideas, we can work on it together, but then that still has to be made into a pattern, like Avanti was saying. That just because we've got a pattern here doesn't mean that you should or your manufacturer is even going to use or is advised to use the pattern that you're making because they have their own like. And that's the other thing, and I don't know how your guys' experience has been. Sometimes even if you have a perfect, like my manufacturer sends me a pattern and I know it works, it's a DXF pattern. When you open it on cloth, things still go out of whack and you're still having to like really spend hours cleaning up that pattern. So it's not a time saver that way. um, the other thing is sometimes maybe you have this idea and you're looking to get pre-orders, you're looking to show it to your clients. And you know, as humans, we are I I would be easier to be sold on something that looks fully baked rather than just a kernel of an idea, right? It's easier to sell me on that. And if that is the goal that you're looking for 3D, where you are wanting to have your clients maybe get pre-orders or something for e-commerce, I do think then what your focus needs to be is not on fitting or pattern making or technical or tech packs, but really focusing on the rendering and and going deep into, because then you have to move beyond Flow. I this may be user skill dependent, but I don't think Flow is very good for rendering anyways. I think you have to learn Blender and other tools if you really want to get like very fancy lighting and make your garments look and really fun videos. But that's a very advanced skill set. It uses different skills that you use from patterning. So if that is the goal, then that's kind of the training that you create for yourself, because completely different tools, completely different skill set that you're using. And then you could be like, okay, if your customer has this idea and the goal is to really put it out in a finished form. And Avanti, please jump in. I would love to get your thoughts into anything that we're speaking about.
Is that okay, Courtney?
Yeah, totally. And then after that, I'm actually going to share about, because I feel like it's timely, about my experience trying to get manufacturers to come on this call, and then we'll move on from there.
That's cool. So I just wanted to add about the rendering part of it. I think one thing that we're really struggling, I think, within the industry is like saying what roles do what, because I think the term 3D designer is extremely broad, and this does cause problems because just 3D designer, 3D fashion designer, like it can mean so many things right now. And I do think that, for example, especially businesses that I've worked with that I know do this well, the people doing renderings are not fashion designers, and they are not pattern makers, and they are not technicians. So sometimes people can get really obsessed with working in 3D as a fashion designer, and you might dive into all these other programs, and you have to have plenty of time to do it, because I can tell you the learning curve on like conventional 3D programs, which have nothing to do with fashion, which are nothing to do with apparel, are really complicated to use, but they give you a result that is photorealistic and industry standard. Because, for example, IKEA catalog, everybody here loves IKEA, right? I love IKEA. So, but IKEA, when you flip through their catalog, or you go on their website, or you go on their website or their app, every single thing in there is a 3D render. They don't use physical objects anymore. They don't have that kind of production, like for visualization process anymore. Everything is rendered. And that is a 3D artist that has sat there and created that, and who has nothing to do with furniture manufacture, right? So like the same applies to fashion, but we're not there yet. And I do see that people are kind of doing all the jobs, and it is a lot to do as one person, as a freelancer. I think people do need to sort of, and also somebody's saying car industry, like basically any product design industry is getting it right, and fashion is not there yet with 3D, because we're kind of trying to get everybody to do everything, and nature of a fashion business is also a bit like that. You kind of just get everything piled on your plate, especially if you're working in corporate and you have to put on a lot of hats. But realistically, it's not so simple. You know, I do think like stuff like AI is, I don't even want to open the conversation to that, but like that is kind of democratizing things like rendering in some way, but maybe not yet for practical use. So that's really something I think is such an important point that you've raised, Sabina. And it's a totally different learning process as well. Like totally different set of skills and yeah.
I mean, the analogy I use is Illustrator, right? A lot of us as fashion designers know Illustrator. We can make great tech packs. Doesn't mean we know all the tools and we can create like these really amazing illustrations. And so it's the same thing, like knowing your skill set and using certain tools to do what you do best, but it's not teaching you what you do best without putting in that work otherwise.
Thank you guys all so much for sharing already. I just want to say how much I appreciate everyone showing up and like chatting today, because like this conversation has just been so beautiful already. Very timely with this part of the conversation, because the experience that I had trying to get manufacturers to come on this call and chat to us about how it works from their side of like using Clo, receiving files from Clo, you know, just in general their experience on that side of the conversation. And the majority of what I was hearing, or in some cases not hearing, was that they use it the same way that we use it. And that is for visualization, for understanding fit and form, and for showing potential clients their work. And they may use patterns that they create themselves in the program, but most often they are not using the patterns that are coming from a 3D designer. And I think the thing that I was taking away from those conversations isn't that, you know, it isn't possible for them to use our patterns, but I think it's very much about the breakdown of responsibilities and expertise. So very much to what Avanti and others have been saying is that, you know, Clo or any 3D program are very big programs. You know, there are lots of different things that you can do in them, very similar to how Adobe, you know, you have Illustrator. There's tons of tools in Illustrator that I don't know how to use and have never used. I can use Photoshop. I'm not great at it. You know, it's very much like that. So like there's probably a portion of a 3D program that would work really, really well for you in the way that you need to use it, in the problem solving that you need to do with it. Whether that is creating visualizations for a website or for a presentation or whatever, or if it's more about looking at proportions to understand how you want a garment to fit and look. But that, again, not necessarily going to translate into a correct pattern unless you have pattern making and technical design expertise. Because those two pieces of the puzzle is going to be what makes that usable on a factory floor. And even then, to Avanti's point, those DX files get messed up. People have different programs. People have different computers. They may not show up the same. There's going to be cleaning up involved. So, you know, the other thing that I was hearing is that on that end, like a lot of times, either because people don't understand that and try to send a pattern that's not really truly usable to a factory, or just because of all the technical issues, they ended up redoing that work anyway. So in that aspect, you're not really saving time. It's not this big, beautiful solve all for, you know, fashion waste and time waste that is sometimes being marketed, or it might sound that way. But it is on the front end in the design conversation a great tool to use to understand proportion, visualization, and knock out some of those things, like Avanti was saying, in like, you know, multiple fit sessions, multiple fit rounds. Like those things are the things that can be reduced. And also, if you think about the conversations that you're having early on, especially with a new client or a large company, where it's very hard to have those conversations if you're working with someone who doesn't have the visualization skill. Because we all know that we've talked to those people. We all know that there's a buyer, a merchandiser, a client who has a great idea or has you know, something that they want to see, and they don't know how to visualize it without seeing it in front of them. And so that's where these tools really, really come in handy, because you can basically create an almost true to life visual that helps them see what they want to see. And that saves time on sampling and, sustainability as far as, fabric waste and shipping and all of those things. And so that is, I think, where the true sustainability lies in these types of programs. I will also say that, in these conversations that I had with manufacturers, they were saying that most often they used them on their own when they were creating presentations to try and get new clients or new customers. So they're showcasing, their capabilities as far as helping, a new founder who, instead of hiring a freelancer, just hires the factory to do their visualizations and, make sure that they're on the same page and and more or less skip the tech pack stage because they're working directly with a factory who understands the construction and then shows them the visualization, and then they're like, okay, check, good to go. So in that way, I can see where there might be a little bit of fear for people like us, or I don't know what everyone on the call is, but like for me, I'm a fashion freelancer. And so I could see where that could be scary, where it's like, oh, people are going to start skipping over us. But I still think that there's, communication barriers. There's still people who really want someone who can meet them where they are, or, speak to them in a way that they can understand, because it's not, and I don't mean that in a language barrier type of way, but I mean that in there's just some people that you can talk to that you can understand better than others. And I think it's more about how our brains work. So I feel like I've been rambling for a minute, but based on what I just said, are there any questions about that as far as my conversations with potential manufacturers that I was trying to come to chat with us? I know there's a couple of hands raised, so just unmute right now and talk if there's questions around this.
Hi.
Hi.
Can I go first?
Yeah, totally.
And it was my question anyway, is that I do have pattern making, I do have technical background, and I'm using Clo, because when I decided to freelance, I said, well, what software am I going to use? And so I'm using Clo, and I am running into those same problems. Things get mangled with the DXF conversions, and I'm just wondering, and we've had this conversation before about how do you label yourself? Like, I am a pattern maker, but is that what I'm going to freelance as, or should I just freelance as a 3D technical designer, So I'm still trying to figure these things out. But what would be the ideal if I want to be a pattern maker who also does 3D technical design? Is it that I should be running two programs? Should I also be investing in Gerber or Optitex and doing the import across just for the 3D visualization, and then put it back into Optitex and Gerber in order to send it to a factory? So I'm not seeing a clear answer emerging at all. And I'm only been using Clo. I'm not an expert yet, but I have been running into some challenges which make me question whether I should be offering myself as a pattern maker.
I think that this is something that we as part of the industry needs to start just modeling. So in my opinion, and I encourage anyone else to speak up on this, I would say make your headline or your tagline or however you promote yourself, and make it as clear as possible. I'm a 3D pattern maker who also helps with visualization. That kind of thing, where I'm a 3D pattern maker who can show you what your garment looks like before we send it to a factory. Something where it's really, really clear to your potential customer how you're able to help them. And I think that's how we're going to start to win in this conversation. Because truly, kind of back to what I was saying before, is there's a lot of different ways to use these programs. And I think using them in your expertise and really honing that expertise is, again, where you're going to start winning. Because if you're a great pattern maker who truly understands those things and can create really beautiful, true to life patterns and fits and things like that, it does help. It does make a difference. Especially, I think, for garments that have more technical fits or details or fabrics or layers, things like that, where there's a lot more involved than just a basic t-shirt, which is also, again, visualization. I am partnering with someone who uses 3D And she's my tech designer for a client. So like my main focus is a designer, and I also do consulting and kind of help with line management. Um, but I don't enjoy technical design. It kind of bogs me down. I know how to do it. I don't want to. And I've never been a pattern maker. I learned it one time in college, and I've never touched it again. So like I know that I could never go into one of these programs and create a usable pattern. I mean, I shouldn't say never, but you know what I mean. But I could partner with someone like you, Sarah, and have you be part of my team where you would create that part. And it would be the same thing as working in on a team where we didn't use 3D. And I was a designer and you were a pattern maker and a technical expert. And, we worked together to create a garment. I think it's the same thing. We need to transition kind of into the future of using these programs and using them in the same way we currently work. It is totally possible to be an expert from start to finish. But I think that those people are going to be few and far between. Anybody else want to jump in on this conversation? Go ahead and unmute. I know that there's hands raised, but I don't know if those are for questions or if those for just people to jump in. So just jump in right now.
I actually had something to add, Courtney, to the manufacturer thing, which I think is really important to note, is that I've found that it's kind of a complicated situation with manufacturers at the moment, because especially, again, I'm talking about this whole outsourcing thing that we've done with a lot of businesses. A lot of manufacturers want to keep their pattern making and patterns in-house, and they don't want to share them with brands, and they don't want to share them and they want to keep that all under their roof, because it's kind of how they can ensure that you continue to work with them, because that part of your IP always kind of stays with them. And I think that because of that, they're very even as a pattern maker, they're not always likely to use your patterns in general. And this is something I've come across with, even if you're not using 3D. There can be difficulties based on the size and the scale of the manufacturer you're working with. This is something that I think is always interesting, because it's not always because the patterns are not good. Sometimes it's really because they don't like. I think what's happened is programs that 3D, because companies are adopting them, they're bringing a lot of those skills back in-house very slowly, but it is happening where they're working more with freelance pattern makers and to bring that sort of IP in-house. And I think that kind of has created a little bit of tension sometimes with manufacturers, which I've often found. And I've seen this personally with projects where clients, they want to vet their fit. Their patterns were made by a manufacturer, the base size fits perfectly, but they're not willing to share the pattern with the grading, because that would mean releasing the pattern to the client, So it's that's also creating different kinds of complexities that we've not seen before in a long time. So I just wanted to add that. Yeah.
I think that also opens up a new avenue for potential work too. For those of you that are pattern making freelancers, start cold pitching to factories and saying, I use Clo and I can help you, and see where that leads. I mean, I think that's the other thing that I would have loved to be able to talk to some manufacturers about and understand, if you are working with someone who is a pattern maker, who has technical expertise and who understands the complexities of this process, where would you still have the rub? Where would you still see opportunity for improvement? How does it transition into a usable part of your process? Cristina said something in the chat, and I kind of made a note to myself as well that I wanted to bring this up, but the physics applied to fabric. And I think Avanti mentioned this too about the sewing, when you have overlapping seams and things like that. Those are things that you really don't have visibility to in Clo unless you're doing everything perfectly. And I should say 3D, not just Clo. But unless you're doing everything completely perfectly. So you have a fabric that is true to life. The physics are perfect, that was analyzed and put in there. Because you can put in, I'm using a 100% cotton twill fabric, but it still might not be the exact same as the actual fabric that you're using. And so it's going to behave differently in the program. And I think those are the things too that people maybe don't always know or understand about using these 3D programs, is that there's still a lot of nuance to it. And there's still a long way to go as far as truly having true to life results that are completely true to reality.
To that point, because Sarah, you had asked originally whether is it still worth learning Gerber and Optitech and whatever as a pattern maker? My approach to this actually, I imagine, would be start with the end in mind, right? Like if you know wherever your product is going to eventually be manufactured, like really knowing what the manufacturer is using and kind of aligning yourself to that, because like what Avanti was saying, you can make the best patterns in Clo, but if the manufacturer is going to basically take that and make their own patterns anyway, then your pattern making isn't really translating. And it's, I think as a pattern maker, and I don't, as a pattern maker, Clo can, I don't think is yet, any 3D program cannot be the sole program that is being used. It's just not there yet. I mean, the very fact that the way any 3D works and pattern making works, when you're actually rendering something on 3D, like you have to delete pattern pieces so that it looks okay and stuff. So, or there is no pocket back, or there is no lining because you can just change the color on the inside. Just that point of it itself. So I do think that as a pattern maker, 3D cannot be the only tool, at least not where the industry is yet, that we can use. Visualization and design and even product development, it's easier.
I would agree. And I think that that is like where a lot of people start, is going to these programs thinking about visualization and how can they use it to create something that they can show a client or put in their tech pack, or I'm sure a lot of us put reference images. So like, there is some market image out there that has something similar to what you like, or maybe you're Frankensteining things where you're screenshotting the neckline or the hem or whatever, to show the visual of what you're trying to accomplish. And so like that is the big win in 3D, is that you can create that and have it not be a Frankenstein of a bunch of different screenshots. It's like, it visually the garment that you want to create. And that is a really beautiful part of the process in these programs. But to your point, it may not necessarily have the interfacing and the collar and the inside of the pocket or the lining or whatever it may be, that is necessary in the actual true life garment. And you can have, you can maybe have those pieces off to the side or, frozen in the background and still have a garment that looks real, or the way it should, I should say. I want to start going into questions. Max, I know you raised your hand. If you want to throw it in the chat, I'll try and grab that like really quickly. There was quite a few questions that came in early, and I just want to, give those people an opportunity to get their questions answered. So, how to begin learning in 3D and what equipment to use. Avanti, I would love for you to chime in for this for a little bit, but I would say make sure that you understand that, these 3D programs are hard on your computer. You need something that is able to run very intensely. I feel like Avanti could like tell you more about this because she gave me so much information. Although I will say, I actually used ChatGPT after I talked to Avanti, and it said like, I want to use 3D programs for fashion design, gave it a ton of information, and said like, if I was to buy a new computer, what should I buy? And had a very enlightening conversation with ChatGPT about like the exact type of computer that I needed to get.
I think the thing with 3D is that, and especially this might tie into the other question about cost, like how much do you charge as a freelancer, because I saw that was on the list. Working as a 3D designer is expensive if you do it well, and especially if you're doing it for pattern making. I do think that that's a cost. I mean, I don't think you need a very powerful computer if you're not going to be rendering. So like that's like a separate issue. You need a good computer, that's for sure. And I always recommend a PC because I think you need an NVIDIA graphics card. Like I'm not going to get into that, but Apple is catching up on this. But I think the other thing to remember is that you need to have, if you're going to do this properly and you're going to make patterns with this, you should be working within an industry standard form, which comes at a cost. It's like you should be thinking, and there's a lot of other things that I think are important to note on this. So I do think it is expensive. The programs themselves are also expensive as well. So like if factor in the hardware, the cost of the software itself, the cost of like the forms that you're going to be using, like all of that really does start to add up. I think it's expensive. And if you're going to be using it in the long term, you have to think of like storage space, because 3D files get very large as well. So like all of these additional costs people don't immediately see. I have to say though, it is still cheaper than working with a program like Lectra, which is just, especially if you're freelance, it's just, the price is just not, it's unattainable for independence. So I think I love the way that 3D program, and I have to say, Browseware for a long time was in that basket, because I know Browseware from years ago as well, because they've been around way longer than Clo. I have books from the 90s, pattern making books, which have Browseware in them, so V-Stitcher in them. And the thing is, like, they used to be in the same price bucket as Lectra, and they have now recently started creating freelancer licenses because they've realized how important sort of these independents are to that market. So that's just, I don't know. Again, I'm sorry if it was a bit of a roundabout answer, but
No, I think that was good. And I would say, just to kind of round out this question, how to begin learning, find a cohort of people who are working in the same program as you, or, find a great online tool, find an Eventbrite, find something that will hold you accountable, give you some type of plan or guidelines to follow, and use something in that realm to get started. Because if you open this program on your own and just try to start learning, like, it's not going to go well. I think, think of like anything really that you learn in life. Typically you learn from someone teaching you, whether that's from a video online, from a book, from, someone in real life. Very rarely do you just like sit down and look at something and figure it out, right? So keep that in mind, and reach out to someone, even someone in this group, if you're learning, and use the resources available to you. I want to move to income, because I feel like it was kind of, Avanti, you mentioned like, the cost of being a freelancer and using these programs. Someone asked if you've noticed a difference in income since starting 3D or offering 3D in your skill set, and how long was it before you really noticed an increase in your workflow and clients? I know for Avanti, like you mentioned, that you kind of just, you include it no matter what. So somebody hires you, they get 3D, period. Jade, I know, also pretty much works exclusively with 3D. So I would love for you guys to say, like, if you've increased your prices, or if there's anyone else on the call right now who has been a freelancer not using 3D and shifted to using 3D, and like, what has been a difference for you?
the thing about working in 3D, it's like, actually pattern making in general, is that it's costly to your time as well. And when you work in 3D, you have to visualize something, it's costly because of the amount of time that you put into it and the effort. And as I said, you need all the subscriptions and everything alongside it. So as a general rule of thumb, I do think that people who work in 3D should be charging more. I don't know if they necessarily do, but they should. And I do think that it does come as a far bigger advantage when people hire you. I know that 3 years ago, it was a very valid response to say, like, I charge like way more because I do 3D, but I don't necessarily think that stands as true now. And that's why when I look at my prices now, that's why I say 3D is not an option. It's not an added thing that they have to pay for. It's just something that I always do, because I do think it's going to become a norm. I think that's something you have to factor into, and that is evolving in terms of prices, because more people are doing it, and there's going to be more people in the market for that. I think it'll matter more like how experienced you are as an individual in the other parts of fashion, not just 3D. So yeah.
I think I want to add to that is, in terms of like my experience, transition from the traditional and 2D into 3D, like, I think it's like for me to learn how to communicate the value of my service or what am I doing for brands. In some ways, like, it's so much more value because they can see everything in 3D. We're building everything, every detail in 3D before we even cut anything, right? And even with pattern making, saying, I'm not like just doing paper pattern, in my own studio, but they still not seeing what that pattern gonna look like, right? So it's all these things is the transformation comes from. Like when I'm doing it in 3D, next day they can see in 3D. Straight away, the form, we're not talking about details finishing, but then straight away silhouette, you're able to communicate that and then get like confirmation. So for me, I feel it's the communication side of things. It kind of increase the value. What can I do for the brands that I'm working for? So I feel like when we're talking about charging, and I feel like I kind of move away from charging hourly to project based, because I do believe more in the value based pricing for my own service now. And also because I'm not only doing pattern anymore, because my background, which kind of go back to the question Sarah was talking about, like how do we name ourselves, categorize myself? Myself is a designer, but I'm also very strong in technical design. So I'm like a hybrid designer. And I think more and more of us going to become like a hybrid designer like that. So I think it's not about, okay, it's very important how we market ourselves, let other people know what we're doing. But I feel most importantly is when you kind of get in contact with that client, how do you kind of communicate? They understand your value and why you're doing things the way you do. For example, I need to explain to my clients, why do I not work with paper cutter or 2D pattern anymore? And I feel if they don't understand, then I fail them, because I believe in this. How can I not make them see what I'm seeing, right? So I often talk to other freelancers in this way, like I feel it's not about selling to them. It's like, if you see this in benefit, did you find a way to communicate better for them to understand too? So I guess like in terms of like, yeah, making more money, which is good, but ultimately for me, it's like the beginning of why first, then the money actually do come after that. So it might be like a, not like a straight answer, how much I charge, something like that. But I do feel like when it comes to pricing, is a lot more, factor going to that, how we charge. So.
Thank you, Jade. And I also want to give a big shout out to Jade too, because Jade was one of the first people that really introduced me to 3D. And I think I stuck with it because of my conversations with her. And she is also a rock star. And I saw that Cristina also mentioned that she felt that Jade was really important to her journey in 3D. So reach out to Jade as well if you're learning and you want to talk to someone. Okay. So I am going to get to Max's question. Thank you for putting it in the chat, Max. I saw you were very detailed. I really appreciate that. But I'm going to do a couple more that came in early, and then we'll switch to that. I know we're getting close on time, so I'm going to try and keep things like really fast and tight. So there was questions, like technical questions. I'm going to actually get those answered after this conversation, and I'll email them out to everyone that was on the call. And then there was a question that says, has anyone been able to pivot their career in a new way after incorporating 3D into their skill set? And I feel like we've kind of answered that a little bit here, where people, like even Jade just said it, she's become kind of a hybrid designer. So I think that is an opportunity where maybe you are a pattern maker and a technical designer, that you're then able to show more visualization and act as more of a designer. So there's those potentials as well. I don't know if the person who asked this is on the call, but if you want to add more nuance to that in the chat, please do. There was questions about what we think are holding people back from investing in 3D, whether that's big companies or even startups, and how do you actually find the time to learn these programs? And to me, the thing that kind of flagged me early a few minutes ago was that I think Browseware starting to offer like that freelancer level really shows that it's because people are doing this on their own time. So it's not only just freelancers, but I think that there's people in working in corporate jobs that are then doing this on their own time because they want to progress, they want to learn these new programs. And we all know that corporate structure 90% of the time does not allow for people to really spend the time to learn these new programs. They don't want you away from your desk. They don't want to, unless they're seeing the ROI, the return on investment, like pretty immediately, they just don't understand. And until it's more widely accepted and used in the industry, they're not going to invest in it until they feel like they're behind. And that's just my opinion. And I have worked in corporate before. I spent the majority of the first part of my career in corporate. So like I'm very familiar with the inner workings of what it's like in a corporate office where they're just like, nah, maybe in a few years. And that's more or less, I think, the situation for businesses not investing in 3D yet. On the flip side, as I mentioned before, like I said, manufacturers are starting to invest in 3D and use it as part of their value proposition and working, trying to get new customers on their own through the use of 3D. And I actually want to lead that into answering Max's question so that we don't run out of time. But he was asking about like why patterns are not reliable for production, kind of going back to the conversation that I was having. And I do want to be clear. I don't want to poo-poo and say that like using 3D is not possible or that it's not usable. But what I was trying to say and make it really clear is that unless you have that technical expertise, like you're saying that you have, Max, there are people who are designers who try to go into these programs and think that they can create patterns based off their visualizations that are usable, and they just don't understand. And so a lot of manufacturers are getting a lot of that and are not interested in trying to use it because they're not seeing the benefit. Whereas if you're partnering with someone like you, Max, who has that technical background, who is creating a true to life pattern and has all that true information, you know, as part of the visualization, that is usable 100%. But I think the people who understand that and are doing that are fewer and far between. So, you know, we have this small subset of people who are learning 3D, using 3D actively, and an even smaller subset of that are actual technical designers and pattern makers who are using it in a true way of that expertise of the field. Does that make sense?
It makes sense. Thank you for clarifying.
Yeah, totally. And I know that I got a little poo-pooey about it, but it was just because I will say I was quite disappointed when I was really trying to get manufacturers to come on and do this call, because I really thought it was going to be like a home run. I thought like, oh yeah, people are going to come talk about this. And it was like surprisingly very difficult. Avanti, Oh, Jade, go ahead.
Add to that, like basically when I first started using 3D, I thought this is it. I'm gonna work with a manufacturer with 3D, and I'm based in UK by the way, and in London. And then I kind of joined this like made in UK program. Like there is this lady, like she's been promoting for made in UK for the last over 20 years. And when I asked her about her, like, do you have any contact for manufacturing working with 3D or Star 3D potentially? She said, yeah, actually there's only one in London, but then they might drop it because not enough demand. So I think it's not because there is no factory yet. It's just we're still quite early in manufacture to adopt. But I feel the more of, you know, pattern maker, designer using, I really feel we are going to that space now. Because when I then go to a trade show, there are a lot of manufacturers in Portugal. They are adopting 3D software and then the whole system already. So I think it's just a matter of time. And also like in certain region, they just more tech savvy compared to London. You know, there's still so many designers still working in their atelier, paper cutting pattern and then draping 3D. That's how they like to work. But that doesn't mean that's going to continue to be that way if you want a business to survive. So yeah, that's my kind of like experience to share with you guys from this end.
We are out of time, but I'm happy to stay here and keep the conversation going for another 15 minutes for anyone who wants to stay. I do just want to say thank you all for showing up and for contributing to the conversation and for sending questions in advance and just being part of this conversation. But we can keep going. So anyone who wants to stay, keep on going.
I actually wanted to add something to Max's question. And Courtney, that exactly what you said. Like, I don't necessarily think there's anything wrong with using Clove for pattern making, but I do, and maybe this is me and other pattern makers can chime in about this, depending on your manufacturer, I don't think production patterns should be done by you. They should be done by the factory. And I think there's a very clear definition needs to be made in what we're sampling, especially, and this is something you would get whether you're using 3D or not, as a pattern maker who's independent. Your pattern is for sampling. It's for getting to those sampling stages, but the production pattern, because I often see people talking about, I'm going to make you production patterns. I have never made a production pattern. That is always handled by the manufacturer, because things like fabric testing, warp and weft shrinkage, what do you call, the word is not coming to me in English, but when the fabric, Rocio's like nodding, and I think she's way more knowledgeable on this than me, but like all of those things come from when you have bulk fabric testing, when you have, you're as a manufacturer, you know what's going to be happening on your line. Like that's why saying, I think you have to be very careful saying that you're doing production patterns as an independent pattern maker, not, and also especially in a program like Chloe, I would probably be more confident saying browseware is better adapted to creating maybe patterns that tend towards production, but I would still be very careful saying that and grading and stuff. But Chloe is still not there yet, especially when it comes to seam allowances and things that you have to add in. So I just wanted to add that in, and I think it's great if you're an independent pattern maker and you're doing it for product development. That's how it should be used, but be careful not to. It's not so smooth unless you're working with a very tiny manufacturer where production is maybe a bit different. But yeah, that's what I wanted to add.
Just a quick question to jump back on that. Like, how would you then label yourself? Like, if you don't say that you're doing production pattern, like, what would you say, like sampling patterns? Like, how would you label that service, literally? And first, thank you for answering.
I mean, I just call myself a pattern maker, and then these are the things that you kind of sort out, because it's so varied from client to client. Like some clients, I make the sample for them, like it really, I make it at my sewing machine, so like it's very varied. I think you just say you're a pattern maker. I don't know, Jade, maybe somebody else can chime in. I'm not sure.
I think for me, like, yeah, I agree. Like, if it's for like larger scale, like if it's a different scale of like production, then that's a different case, because it's down to their setup. Because maybe they need different seam allowance width than the normal like production pattern needs, right? But then like for me, if it's smaller scale, because I work with a lot of small or independent like brands, they do have in-house. So those are production pattern I am making for them, because they are making more in a small scale, and also maybe they have like limited, like they call it limited edition. They maybe only making 30 pieces, but then like at higher price. So I am making my production pattern for them, right? And also, but for me, is I'm the one vetting the pattern, because I will make the first sample as well. So my service will go from design to basically to do a production pattern, but by vetted my own sample. I will go through my sample, so I know there's nothing wrong with my pattern for someone else to make up from my pattern, basically. So I think it really depends. You need to maybe first understand what type of client you want to work with, what type of brand, and the scale they want to go down. Then you can come back. Okay, what type of pattern, what standard, what level you want to kind of make for that client. So I think because there's no one rule for all. We are working with different kind of like scale of brand and also different market, right? Some people maybe like middle America, that's a new term for me. I didn't know that term before, but they are like, luxury brand or designer brand. Yeah, there's so many. So as a pattern maker, you also need to know what type of brand you want to work for, what type of pattern as well. So that's my advice. Yeah. But I think Rocio is here. She's really experienced from the manufacturer side, so
I do want to give her a shout out. She was one of the people who actually responded to me when I was trying to bring a manufacturer on, and we had a really nice conversation, and I'm glad you were able to drop in with us. We can't hear you. You're on mute, and I can't unmute you for some reason either, so you have to.
Here we go. Hi. Hi, everyone. I'm a little bit late to the chat, but nice to meet you all. So I find it interesting as I jumped into the chat that there seems to be a lot of I think variations of the services we offer, and yet it's almost like in a lot of senses we've forgotten. I do have the benefit of having been around forever, but when I first started working with imports, the technical package, that what we now call the tech pack, was considered the specification. All the documentation and writing, flat sketch, measurements, tolerances, and maybe just some, brief sewing instructions. That was considered technical specification. What you didn't call it a package unless you had the pattern and the sample to go along with the technical specification. So I've noticed over the years, over a span of 4 decades, that a lot of the language has changed. So for example, I know that in Asia, a merchandiser has a completely different function compared to a merchandiser in America. Merchandiser in America mainly deals with the retail end of the business, while in Asia, it's more like almost like a project management person, like a sample manager. Am I right? So I think that's part of the problem that we're having, where there isn't one common base of vocabulary that we're all referring to, and I think that's what's causing a lot of issues, a lot of problems. um and we're having such a hard time describing what we are, what we do, because at least on my end, I've noticed the customer evolving. Like when I started, I would only work with other designers, other pattern makers. Everyone I interacted with had an industry background. Today, for a number of years, I've been working with today, mainly social media influencers, creators who have no industry background whatsoever. So, I find myself having to really dumb down the language, like to the level of literally a 5-year-old, and do a lot of pictures. Oh, and this is this, and this is that. And that's the only way to somewhat try to come to, an, an even level. But these days I just call myself a sample developer.
I think that kind of goes back to our conversation earlier too about like visualization, where these tools are really great for visualizing and having those conversations with your customer, client, whatever you want to call them. But to be able to say like, am I understanding what you're trying to do? This is the thing that I think you're saying. Is this right? Right? Like we all kind of have to do that at some point.
Yes, and even if we feel like we're doing a good job at presenting it, some people are better at visualizing things than others. Even when you present them with a 3D model, a lot of times you get the first sample, which is like pretty close to the 3D. They'll be like, "Oh no, that's not how I thought it was going to fit," and then you think, "Well, but this is what you proved." So part of the problem too, especially I feel in women's wear, menswear is easy. But women's wear, there's always that. I used to have a client who was a retailer, and she used to tell me, "You know what, Rocio? Women just lie. We lie to ourselves about our size. We lie to ourselves. We keep telling ourselves that we're a size small forever and ever, while the guys keep telling themselves they're always a large. You're never gonna meet a guy that tells you, 'Oh, I'm a size small.'"
That's really funny.
But it's true. She's so right.
Yeah, I can totally see the psychology behind that too.
Yeah, but I know that some of you were wondering why more manufacturers are not adopting 3D in the same way you're seeing it, from the design's perspective. I feel, and I talk to a lot of manufacturers here, especially domestically here in LA, we're the largest manufacturing hub in the country. So, we all know each other, we know of each other, and, every now and again, we talk shop. So the main consensus is this. As you mentioned earlier, most of our clients are not like manufacturing millions of units or even thousands of units. Most of at least for us, the domestic market is relatively small, where if you're making, I don't know, 500 units of something, that's already a big order. So because of that, it's two things. You're not really having to per se interact much with the client, because there are so many product developers here that work on a freelance basis. So that's one thing. But the other thing is, I, as a manufacturer, yes, I kind of stumbled into 3D very early on when things were still being done manually, literally with Photoshop. A lot of my mapping and all that, I used to do it manually. But because I stumbled across 3D almost by accident, I feel like even after all these years, I still can't justify hiring someone to work on site full time, just working on 3D. Because anything digital is the easiest thing to outsource. Okay. So I find myself, like most other businesses, outsourcing it because the time it would take for me to train someone, to train a pattern maker who may be very good at pattern making by hand or using CAD, who may know a lot about construction, but the time it would train me, it's just not a good investment for me. So, I mean, that's the main reason why I know that most manufacturers, unless they're pretty large factories overseas, we can't really justify the investment. Okay. Now, the flip the flip side of that is, as technology has also, just like it's allowed us to outsource a lot, anything digital, it's also allowed us to, especially now with the situation in the US with the tariffs and all that, I feel like what I'm seeing is that it is bringing me opportunity to work with a lot of designers overseas who have clients here who are now still in shock over the tariffs, and they're now thinking, oh, I don't want to lose that account. And I'm working with a few of them now, onboarding them as collaborators so that they continue doing the design, they hand everything over to us, and then we handle the sampling and the approval process from here. And they don't have to worry about shipping samples back and forth or even sourcing fabrics, because we also do the sourcing here for them too. So that's one way we've managed to make the best of that situation, which is affecting everyone. But the other thing I see now, like for example, I started thinking, the last couple of years, I noticed that the number of difficult people has increased. Okay, from when I first started to now, the expectations have shifted, where everybody wants everything yesterday and for free, right? So it's been difficult to manage that, and I know I'm not the only one, right? I mean, how many of you have to go through that more often than they would like, right? Pretty much every single one of us. So I feel like that has also changed the expectations. The instant gratification is so common in society these days that they expect it with professional services as well. So, I decided one day that I was feeling really burned out. I'm sure we've all been there, right? One of those, I had a hell of a week, a few months ago. And then I thought to myself, I'm starting to lose the joy, and I don't want to get to the point where I'm getting completely burned out. So what I started doing is like, okay, I've had a bunch of designs that I never had enough time to develop for myself. So I thought to myself, okay, I'm going to do an experiment. Let's see what happens if I design something and I start doing away with the brands. What happens if, with all our knowledge, we start reaping the benefits of our knowledge and start focusing on doing, on-demand, made to measure? So I started doing it for a client as an experiment, because I wanted to try it in an environment with someone that already had an established clientele, just to see how it went. It's gone really well for them. So now I've got hard data on a way to collaborate with social media creators, and we collaborate. They do the creative part. We collaborate, and we don't need anyone in the middle, because it's literally factory direct. I think that's where things are going to go. I think where things are going to go with the volumes of apparel not being sustainable, like at the levels we're still producing right now. I think what's going to happen, I think we're going to go back to basics, okay? And everything is going to start shrinking. Okay? I'm also starting to see more machines, 3D printing machines, 3D printers, that they do a lot for the price, for the cost. I've seen CNC machines under $1,000 that before just were not available. Just last year, were not available yet. So I'm seeing a lot of what I call desktop manufacturing coming in. So, and that's one of the biggest trends that I'm seeing that I don't see too many people talking about. I mean, there is a lot of people, a lot of hobbyists who are getting these machines and starting their own businesses literally out of their desk, from their desks. I myself, every now and again, sure. Do I have a factory full of machines? Sure. Do I do every sample myself? No. But every now and again, if I want to test something, Avanti, I think you were mentioning something about, testing things on your sewing machine. That's exactly what I do. You don't need to have a full factory for that. You don't need to have a full factory to be able to offer product development services, full product development services. As long as I myself have my domestic machine, same one I've had since college, since the 80s, still there, still working my single needle. I've got my 5-thread overlock singer still from college. That was my graduation gift. And I sort of like splurged a little bit and got myself another 5-thread machine and converted it to a cover stitch. It's one of those fancy ones. I see Sarah going, ooh, yeah. So I've got like everything I need to, if not necessarily make a full production sample, at least test a lot of the construction before I give it to the team ready for a sample. So you can do a lot from your desk. You really can.
Thank you so much for sharing all of that. I know a lot of people on this call are just like energetically nodding their heads and just really enjoying listening to you talk. I'm so sorry that I have to cut you off, but I do have to get going. So I do have to end the call. But thank you all again so much for coming. This was wonderful. There's so much conversation in the chat and just like joy in this conversation. Diane, I know you had questions about exporting. I will make sure that question gets answered for you. So keep an eye out for an email from me. It's going to be answered by Avanti. So like in reality, just thank Avanti. But I'll make sure you get an answer. So again, thank you all for coming and have a wonderful, wonderful day and great weekend.